I imagine a world where our matriarchal systems are upheld and respected. I imagine a world where our women stand tall, strong, and proud, just like our cedar trees. Hot squiled noyup, neista ants, Myia quiensna, neista skootmish, tenacha stamos ochomeo, Shenquen mentomi heichka osiem. Good evening, everyone. My name is Myia Antone, and I am a youth from the Squamish Nation, as well as proud Ukrainian and Norwegian roots. First off, thank you for joining us tonight and bear witnessing everything that we have to say on this carpet. And I'm so honored and humbled to be sharing this stage with such amazing women who you've seen before me and who will be coming after me. And I also want to thank Raven Institute and Tierra for holding such a beautiful space. I am a daughter, a sister, a wilderness guide, a lifelong student, and a proud Indigenous woman. I grew up in the town of Squamish, but not speaking my language or knowing my culture. In fact, I grew up embarrassed of being Indigenous. I was embarrassed of being Indigenous to this beautiful land that we are gathered on tonight. And this isn't exclusive to my story, but this is common for so many Indigenous peoples who are continuously displaced and affected by colonization every day. Now tonight, I'm going to be focusing on Indigenous women and our strength and our resilience. And I also want to acknowledge our two-spirit queer and trans community members who I continuously look up to for strength, because they too have faced their own continual and lateral violence. And as I'm focusing on Indigenous women tonight, I want to use my position and privilege as a cisgendered, heterosexual, able-bodied woman of color to hold space for important community members and the knowledge that they hold and protect. I imagine a world where our women take care of themselves and each other. The way the mother tree takes care of the forest, sending water and nutrients down through her roots to the younger, more vulnerable trees. As Indigenous women, we've been targeted since contact. Racist and sexist laws were created, and they have continued every day since. We went from being central forces in our community to having little to no value. And today, we are 12 times more likely to be missing and murdered than non-Indigenous women. And we are 16 times more likely to be missing and murdered than white women. That's me, my sisters, my aunties, my cousins, these beautiful women I share the stage with. And although these numbers are how much of the world sees us, we are so much more than these statistics. A nation is not conquered until the hearts of its women are on the ground. This is a well-known quote among Indigenous communities down in the States and here in Canada. And this is exactly what happened. These laws have put us down and put us in these boxes that we can't get out of. And as Indigenous peoples, our connections to the land is what makes us strong. Our languages, our cultures, our laws come from the land. And without our connection to it and the land itself, we lose who we are as Squamish people. I lose who I am as a Squamish matriarch. And I know this connection to the land well. Like I said, I grew up in the town of Squamish, not speaking my language or knowing my culture, but I grew up on my traditional territory. And it is a really beautiful territory. Yeah. And this is a privilege that not all Indigenous peoples have, and I'm so honored and grateful that I got that. I grew up on the land that spoke the same language as my ancestors. I grew up on the land that once supported my relatives thousands and thousands of years ago. When I was younger, I liked to think that the land was speaking to me, whispering in my ear as the wind played with my hair, reminding me who and where I come from, reminding me that I come from a long line of matriarchs. Matriarchs like my amazing Maisie Baker, my great-grandma who went to residential school and never learned how to read, but went to Ottawa to stand up for our communities. for our nation, to stand up for our women. Now, last fall, I got to live and learn on the land in Dene Da, in Yellowknife, with Dene elders and community members. We spent 4 weeks living on the land and living in community. Our land and our camp was full of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, academics, elders, community members. We lived, loved, and breathed the land. I even got my gun license. And I haven't used it much in Vancouver, but. And one important teaching that I got from an elder up there was learning how to listen to the land. We had to listen and learn how the land gives consent. Consent for us to be there, consent to take anything, consent to harvest medicine. And we went on a lot of medicine walks. And if you went on a medicine walk with our elder Paul, you packed as if you were going on a camping trip. I swear you packed layers and food and water, and you were out all day. He said he wasn't lost, but I think he was lost. And what I didn't completely understand at the time was that while we were learning about consent in relation to the land, we were learning about consent in relation to our bodies. How to ask for consent, how to give consent, how to listen for consent. And I think of how powerful it was for an all-women's cohort, much like the one you see tonight, learning about consent from an elder. Now, we have a long history of violence on Indigenous women and Indigenous women's bodies, especially when you think of the forced sterilizations of Indigenous women here in Canada. And I think of how powerful it was to have these teachings on the land and to get to bring these teachings back home to my community. And today I practice consent with the land, and I practice consent with my body. And to come back to these teachings is to come back in good relationship with the land and with Mother Earth. And to come back to these teachings is to come back in good relationship with my body. I imagine a world where our women bloom. We grow, bloom, and flourish when our time is right. Now, to understand the real history of colonization here in Canada is to understand that as Indigenous peoples, we had to be separated from the land. They took us off of our land and put us on smaller pieces of land, sometimes not even our own, these pieces of land that we call reserves today. And they had started and have continued to hurt Mother Earth every day since. And now you see these people hiking and skiing and climbing in our special places that are hard to get to and that our own people haven't seen and may never get to see. Our special places like Chichioy, the two sisters that remind us to be kind and respectful, otherwise known as the lions. Or Nchkai, Mount Garibaldi, the place that saved our people during the Great Flood. Now our land holds these stories, and we need to get our own people and our women and our storytellers back on the land because we need the land and the land needs us. But we have to acknowledge that it takes time and resources and gear and money to be out on the land. And while we can engage with these economic barriers, we must also acknowledge that these challenges are part of a greater challenge, and that these challenges have allowed the outdoors and my land to be a playground for white privilege. So we need to get our own people and our own women back on the land and reclaim these sacred spaces and remind the outdoor industry and the world that we are still here and that we have knowledge and experience and relationships with these lands that no one else has and no one else will ever have. There are so many unresolved intergenerational traumas in our community, and I know that reconnecting back to our land and connecting Indigenous peoples to our land is one way of healing. I imagine a world where our women are powerful. Powerful like Mother Earth, who brings us rain and thunder and sunshine all in the same day. And we get a lot of that here in Vancouver. So I invite all Indigenous women in this room to come out on the land with me and come out on a hike. Like Tiara mentioned, I've started a nonprofit called Indigenous Women Outdoors, and it breaks down all barriers for Indigenous women to access the outdoors. And I invite everyone else in this room to learn the real history of colonization and the impact it has had on our women. And that first step is reading the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's final report, and reading those calls to action and understanding your role and your place in that. I imagine a world where our women are listened to and heard. Heard like the thunderbirds who demand to be listened to because we have so much to say. What kind of world do you imagine? Thank you. Thank you.